it's always interesting who you meet on a train. And I'm very lucky that I met Air Commodore Rich Davies, CBE, on a train recently. And just the way he was as a leader and his humility, as well as you could just tell there was a depth of experience. I wanted to have him on the podcast. So here he is, Rich Davies. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me along today. And yeah, I don't. I think as we talked about on the train, I don't. I very rarely engage with people. I will sort of put my headphones on and maybe read a book or distract myself. And we very quickly before I think I could get my headphones in, you'd sort of had a chat with me, and that was it. And the conversation flowed from there, and the journey went very quickly. It
Yeah.
was a very enjoyable hour on the train.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a lesson, really. Again, I was on the train the other day. And I don't always engage with it. Really, like you, I sometimes very. I'm an extrovert. I'm an introverted extrovert, I think, or an extroverted introvert. Maybe even um, I think they call ambivert, where you're neither one nor the other, sort of bit in the middle. But again, a fascinating guy who worked in solar and wind power. And we again, Ian Dunn. We got chatting and exchanged details. But don't underestimate who you're sitting near or next to, or what you can learn. And I think back to my mother, who always said, Jonathan, everybody you meet has something to teach you if only you would listen. It may be how not to do things,
Very true.
but they got
Very
something to.
true.
And I think that would be my encouragement to people. Have more conversations with people that you wouldn't normally have a conversation with. You don't want as we had Ozza Lashy, one of the earlier guests who was special forces and now works in cybersecurity. He said, I deliberately choose people who are very different from me. What would the world be like if everyone in my company was just like me? It would be a nightmare. We want this diversity. And so do talk to people who you think are a little strange and a bit odd, but you don't know them.
One of the things that Kate and I, my wife and I, do when we're on holiday is we'll look at a couple or we'll look at somebody and we'll try and work out who they are or what they are. And on the odd occasion that we've engaged with people, I have been absolutely 100% out in my
Yeah.
assessment of an individual. And I have absolutely prejudged them by potentially what they're wearing, what they look like. And then you sort of have a conversation with them and discover that they're this amazing individual or couple. And you think, crikey, I need to work on my ability to read people because, as I say, it's something we have a little bit of a laugh about. I don't often necessarily find out the full journey of somebody by asking them, but on the occasion that we have, I'm always wrong. So
Yeah.
maybe that's something I need to work on.
Yeah, Rich, I really relate to that. And you and I, as armed forces officers, were trained to have a good sense of judgment very quickly. Your judgment, we're talking about air combat. You were a fast jet pilot, treating people as a weapons instructor, training them, that kind of stuff. They had to make decisions at speed. And we've just been talking about how there's those Russian jets flying into the Baltic states, and there's going to be a NATO jet, often Royal Air Force One, that will engage with them. Sometime soon, someone's going to shoot somebody else down because they have to make these judgment calls, these very quick calls. Do they, don't they? So I've tuned that bit up. But the problem was I found in the armed forces, particularly armed forces, this sense of, if you're not careful, you can become superior, that you're military and the others are civies or whatever, some dismissive them and us. So there's always the them, us kind of thing, that you can quickly become too judgmental. You want good judgment, but don't be judgmental. And I think that probably my undoing in my military career was why I'm not chief of the general staff was when I was an instructor at Santa, some deputy commandant who I don't ever remember meeting, but he questioned my judgment. I'm not sure what he questioned it on, but it was on my report. And so really that was death knell, though I didn't know it till years later when I got to disclose the information, the Freedom of Information Act. You get to see what someone's written on you. It's a bit unfair when you've never had the chance to even
Yeah,
find out what it was about.
I also think that you, having now left, a lot of your view on leadership and a view on who are the commanders is an age based thing in the military. So you will. I mean, obviously there's rank on the shoulder, so that gives it away. But it's the more senior you are tends to be the older you are, and therefore the assumption is that you're more experienced the older you are in the military. And I think having left and gone into industry, that's not necessarily the case. There are some hugely talented people in leadership roles, or who have leadership roles that aren't necessarily the 50-plus-year-old individual. They could be the 20-something-year-old because of their depth of experience. And I think in the military, it's so structured, and you get so conditioned to age equals experience, that sometimes, actually reflecting now, I work very hard at trying to empower people, and trying to get people to have that sense of leadership at a younger level. But ultimately, the default setting would always be, well, you're the senior rank, therefore you're the person in charge. And I think I found it refreshing, having left, to see that there is a subtle difference in the outside world.
Yeah, I'm really liking that. And there's the New York Jewish friends of mine would say there's an old saying: "Too soon old, too late smart."
Mm.
That you really need to pick up those street smarts early in life, and also that diversity of thinking from people of different backgrounds. I like the concept of reverse mentoring, where a CEO will have a younger member, maybe in his early 20s, as his mentee, but actually there's the reverse mentoring as well, whereas the CEO said, "Look, what would your generation say that I, as CEO, need to do? Well, have you thought about this? What's that? It's this kind of thing that we all think is important." Oh, right. But look, lovely having you on, and let's talk about the experiences that have shaped your leadership as others have experienced it now. You're now out working as a consultant and as an advisor in air and space, for Europe's largest missile producer. I think I'm right in pronouncing it MBDA.
That's
Is that
correct.
right?
Yep. Yep.
MBDA. But fast jets was your theme. From fast jets to business is really what we're calling this. And you were also the commander of Marham Station. I was reading recently about Marham Station in one of those fabulous novels by the former head of MI5, who's died recently, Dame. Help me, her name. But anyway, she was a fabulous novelist as well as being MI5, and she had this terrorist chase of these baddies all the way across the Norfolk coast and near Sandringham, where you know well. And Marham came into it, as well as Lake and Heath. And it was actually the A10s that they were trying to get at. The commander of the A10, who'd in the story killed some people at a wedding, that from one C-130 gunship had fired upon the wedding and killed everybody, and it'd been an accident, but the person never forgave them. And on the anniversary was coming to kill the commander. It was all very good stuff. I don't want to ruin it, but I was thinking of RAF Marham there because there was a special connection, wasn't there, with the Queen? Tell us that. You were an ADC to the Queen.
Yeah, so I first of all, so it's Marham. So I learned from the locals that you say the word Marham. So,
Okay.
but I've never heard anybody ever call it RF Marham. But I was very quickly corrected by the High Sheriff, who was from down in Market, on my first engagement event as station commander. But so, as the station commander, one of the huge privileges you have, not only of commanding a tornado station, as it was for me, and the people under my command there, but also you have this ceremonial role as ADC to Her Majesty the Queen. And the reason that Marham has that association with the Queen is because Sandringham, I think, as you said there, is about 10 miles up the road. And over the winter time, when the royal family would go to Sandringham, then the Queen would see RAF Marham, and RAF Marham was her station. She was the honorary Commodore of the station, and she would come and visit and meet the personnel and their families. And as her first official event before she would return to London after the Christmas and the winter break, and it afforded me some hugely privileged opportunities to meet the late Queen, and who was an extraordinary woman.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think she was exceptional, and like you, I had the chance to meet her. Which, before we go into your stories of your life and growing up and things and your parents, which I'd be interested to hear, I always list her as one of the inspiring leaders that I've met. Who would you call out as your inspiring leaders? I think you mentioned a guy called Glenn, but I just think others that you'd want to mention who you think should come on the podcast because you found them very inspiring.
So Glenn, as you said, so Glenn Torpey was my first station commander out in Germany, and was the first senior officer that I'd explained. I was only 22 years old when I was on my first combat squadron out in Germany, flying tornadoes, and he was the first one to call me by my first name as a senior officer, and just that single moment for me. Even though we all got name badges on, it's pretty obvious what your name is. Actually, the station commander calling you, "Hey, Rich, have you had a good day?" was quite a momentous moment for me. Nobody at that rank had ever called me by my first name, let alone even want to talk to me. So, and I'd watched him and I'd watched his style, and he had inspired me. So Glenn is, and he in his retirement and during a latter part of his career, and he went on to be the chief of the air staff. Has become a good friend of mine. Um, but I guess probably the people that I have reflected on this, when we chatted about it before coming on, and I've sort of thought about it over the last few months. So I've not had many interactions with industrial leaders since leaving. I've only been out of the Air Force for the last 3 years. So a lot of the people that have inspired me have either listened to in presentations or speeches that may have come to visit courses that I've been on, or I've read about. And a lot of the people that have inspired me may not necessarily be the big industrial leaders, but they're the explorers, the adventurers. Ellen MacArthur, I think, is one enormously inspirational woman who I would love to sit around a table and chat to and find out what drove her and motivated her. And you can read it in a book or you can watch it on a documentary, but actually having that one-on-one conversation to really get behind the challenges she faced in what she achieved in her life through sailing. I mean, I'm not a sailor myself, but I just look at someone like her and think, you know what, I think having her around the table would be a fascinating conversation. So it's people like that I would love to, the Van Alf Fiennes of this world, the people who've done some amazing things, probably quite self-motivated, probably not great in a big environment leading people. They're probably quite selfish, and I don't say that having known these people, but I sense probably you have to be quite selfish to do those sort of things. So
You make
maybe
me
not necessarily the great team leader.
You make me smile because I've been put in touch with Colonel John Blashford Snell. Now, you may not have come across him, but he was a Royal Engineer Colonel, and he led Operation Rally, which was getting the young people
Hmm.
to go exploring around the world and travel to some very remote spots and do some very challenging things to help the locals, but also just stretch their leadership. And he's later on in his life now, but yeah, we're in touch, and he's going to come on. And but just even talking to him, hello, sort of like, it's the War Office. Do you want to fight? It's like a voice from the past. But yeah, special kind of leaders, these explorers, and so it's been fabulous having a few on recently.
There's one other.
Uh,
There is one other, and there's a little bit of a story behind this. So Sir Michael Rake, I don't know if you know Sir Michael. Sir
so
Michael
Michael,
Rake. So he was the former chair of BT, chair of EasyJet. Has had a very high profile career. But I met Sir Michael through his father, Derek Rake. Now, Derek Rake was a Spitfire pilot during the Second World War. And he was a Spitfire pilot on 41 Squadron, which is the squadron that I commanded. And back in 2010, we were celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. And so we wanted to invite a bunch of Spitfire pilots and their families and honour them. And Derek was our guest speaker. And we managed to get Derek along, and he was one of the last remaining, the few. And Derek came to the day at Coningsby, and I was just a squadron boss at RAF Coningsby. And Derek had said, "Do you mind if I bring my son along?" That's no problem at all. No problem at all. I did no due diligence on who his son was, and so we had a great day. I fawned over Derek all day long. He was I think probably in his 80s by then, and Derek's slowly started to get a little bit nervous about the speech, and I was going to get him to do the after dinner speech as our guest speaker. And he was, what should I say? And I said, just tell us some stories. Tell us some stories. You'll captivate the room. And I sort of said hello to Michael. And I said, "Hi, Michael. I'm delighted you could come with your wife, and and no problem at all. We've got you on the top table." Again, I didn't look at anything. I didn't even notice that actually one of my young officers had written Sir Michael Rake on his little placemat. Anyway, the dinner goes on, and Derek stands up and starts to speak, and he starts talking about he was shot down in Yugoslavia, and he was just telling these amazing stories. You could hear a pin drop. It was just absolutely what I wanted from the evening. And a couple of times Derek turned to me, and I was sort of sat there and said, "Am I boring them, Rich? Should I keep going?" I said, "Do not stop. You go as long as you want." And he stood and talked for about 45 minutes, quite lucidly. His memory was absolutely superb on all the stories. And he's a fighter pilot. He wants to tell a bunch of pilots his stories. Anyway, we go to the bar afterwards, and Sir Michael comes up to me and says, "Rich, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. Secondly, thank you very much for making my father the focus of the evening." And I still had no idea who he was. And he said, and what was really quite interesting, sad, and also didn't surprise me, he said, "That's the first time I've ever heard my father talk about his experiences as a Spitfire pilot. So thank you very much for inviting me to listen to my father." And I had this conversation, and I said, it doesn't surprise me. I know, being a pilot, we love to talk about ourselves, but actually, we like to talk about ourselves with other pilots. My wife would be the first to say, I very rarely sit in a party or an event and talk about what I do or what I did. But put me in a room with a bunch of pilots, and you can't shut us up. And I said, you need to capture your father's stories, otherwise they'll be gone. And obviously afterwards, I then did a "Who is Sir Michael Rake?" I went, "Oh my god, here is this senior chairman, global leader," and I've absolutely ignored any of. And actually, I did talk to Sir Michael afterwards over a glass of wine in London. He said, "You know what, Rich? I was delighted that you had absolutely not fawned over me as an individual, and actually this was about my father, and I
Yeah.
thank you for doing that." And we've become very good friends ever since, and
Well, get him on.
he's been
Get
a
him on.
great mentor to me.
Let's have him as your guest on the podcast, along with Glenn. I think
Hmm.
both of them would be fabulous guests. But that tells so much in the story that you had. But also, I remember few books have stuck in my mind. One was A Piece of Cake about RAF Spitfire pilots, and it's just a rip roaring novel, and just how horrendous it was, how young these
Hmm.
pilots were, most of them 18, 19, 20, and the bullets ripping through the fuselage, and if they hadn't got a piece of metal plate underneath their seat, just taking them out through the back or through their legs or whatever, and just how quickly so many of them died. Really was the few, and what they did was so courageous. They deserve all the credit that they've got. Um, and yeah, I think it's a very good point you make. When pilots are together, they do love to swap stories. I mean, there's also, of course, as we tease pilots, how do you know there's an RAF pilot in the room? And the answer is
He'll
they'll tell
tell
you
you.
they're an
Yeah.
RAF pilot. But we had a mutual friend in Adam Fox Edwards, who's a good friend of mine, and he was a Tornado pilot. And we joined PricewaterhouseCoopers together and remained friends ever since. And he came to the wedding of my wife Lee and I 10 years ago. So we've remained good friends for a long time. So let's go back to people being shaped by their experiences. You've taken on some really demanding roles as a pilot. You've gone to the Higher Command and Staff course and the Royal College of Defence Studies. Both, for those who've never known the military, they pick out the very brightest and the best and the most senior ranks to do these courses, which mix in different members of the armed services, but also with people from the civil service and from business. And they're fascinating courses. Just before we go and talk about your life, what did you take from those two very special courses? Because you must have met some interesting peers.
Yeah, both fascinating courses. I think the Higher Command and Staff course is very UK based. It's a very, I mean, we did have a couple of international students on that course, but it's very much six from the Army, six from the Navy, six from the Air Force, and a few others. And it's about, the future commanders. And that's the premise of the course. And it's giving you that strategic view of command. RCDS, 100 students and an international cohort, um, including industry leaders, including politicians. But what I took from that particular course is my view of myself and my view of the UK is very different to somebody else's view of the UK from another country. And I have a view of who I think we are as a nation, and who I think I thought I was. And you're given presentations on global challenges and global trends and strategic issues globally. And the view from the UK and the view that I had been given was very different to my Indian or my Pakistani, or we had a Chinese officer on the course, um, and their view of us was very different to what I thought their view of us was. And so that taught me that you can't assume what other people think of you. You need to have a degree of empathy, but you also need to try and put yourself in their shoes, whatever that
Mm.
may be, and don't make an assumption that your particular view or your vision on something is necessarily right, because seen through a different lens, it can be seen as very, very different. And I learned an awful lot about what makes the world tick, and I now do take a look at world politics and world events, and I do try very hard, albeit unsuccessfully often, to see what it might be like through a different lens, through a different life experience, depending on the nation you live in. And that was quite profound to me, because I had a Pakistani pilot on one side of the chair to me and an Indian on the other, and I think they did it deliberately. Um, they were best of friends through the course. They shared political views, they challenged each other, but it was a very free and engaging course. And our commandant made it that way. A retired civil servant who was brilliant at actually saying, this is a comfortable, safe place for you to argue, debate, but be fair and respectful. And I now look at what's gone on politically between India and Pakistan, and you go, there's two guys who actually shared a view on the UK that I went, oh wow, I didn't realise you looked at us like in that way. So I
How,
learned an
how
awful
did
lot
how
during
did
that.
they look upon how did they both look upon the UK?
Not not as positively as I might have thought, and uh, actually they made it very clear that actually our view was quite naive about what is going on, and their view was, you have an assumption based on historic norms and historic trends of where the UK was and where Britain was in the world as an empire, but actually you haven't lived the experience of what they're living right now. And it was quite. I had a profound conversation with the Pakistani officer about. We were talking about global warming, and and it was, the green agenda was, lots of speakers were coming in talking about, the green agenda, and you need to, these growing nations need to stop burning fossil fuels. And he turned to me, and the Pakistani stopped and said, Rich, do you find I find it incredibly patronizing. We're trying to get electricity into some of the communities in my country that have never had electricity, and the only way they can do that is by burning coal. Yet you're telling me that I'm not allowed to do that. Do you think that's fair? And I thought, well, probably not. We'll say, well, you can get solar panels, and we can do. And he said, the simple way of getting heating and electricity is to burn a bit of coal. Yet we're being told by you we can't do that. And I did find it a fascinating insight into not making sweeping assumptions that we necessarily are absolutely always right.
It brings it back, doesn't it, to our judgment? And time and again, I'm reminded to learn two things, which is always quite useful: 10, 10, 10, and your best friend's perspective. And the 10, 10, 10 is, when you get wound up about something, how important will this be in 10 weeks' time, 10 months' time, 10 years' time? And then your best friend's perspective, I always find quite useful, to first person, second person, and third person. But if you imagined your best friend having the drama you had now, what advice would you give your best friend? Write it down. your advice to him in a letter, read the letter, and then act on it. Now, you can give advice to everybody else. We're terribly good at giving advice. I mean, crikey, you and I are advisors. You advise on defense issues and space and air. I advise on leadership to CEOs and boards and top teams. Um, so we're really great at giving advice. I was on a walking meeting with the CEO just earlier today before this recording, and it just flowed. It was very, I went, oh, that's really useful. And yeah, I mean, sometimes they want mentoring, sometimes they want coaching, but we're great at giving it out, but are we good at taking it?
Yeah.
And are we good at seeing others' perspective and how they see us? And it's a bit like I'm recording for the CEO's Compass that I mentioned, which people on the audiobook won't be able to see, but I'm just holding up the latest book, How to Navigate Your Team Through Turbulent Times, the CEO's Compass, which as this recording goes out with Rich and myself, it's about a week after we've done the book launch. And in getting these perspectives from over 400 leaders and putting it into a book, there are some common themes, but time and again, we do need reminding that how we sound, for example, as I do the audiobook, when I hear my own voice coming back, I go, wow, that's really weird. You're like, God, do I really sound like that? Yeah, you do. But it's because you're not used, you cannot see yourself through other people's eyes, the Indian and the Pakistani and the Brit. And I think it's a really good lesson for us as leaders about really working hard at getting 360 feedback, at hearing perspectives from other people. Perception is reality to them.
I also think, Jonathan, that one of the things I've learned, and I learned through leaving the service, and I'd spent 32 years in the Air Force, and I was, I guess, absolutely indoctrinated from the age of 18. I knew no other world than that I'd seen in the Air Force. And when it came to me leaving, and it was the right time for me to leave, I was really challenged by that mentally, because I was going through a grievance phase, if I'm honest, because I was leaving an organization that I'd grown up with, and it had been everything to me, and the people around had been everything to me. And I remember my wife and I were talking about things, and I was listening to people telling me everything's going to be fine, Rich. You don't need to worry, and they were telling me what I should feel rather than understanding how I felt about something, and having empathy and understanding rather than necessarily telling someone what they should feel or how they should act, and actually going, okay, I'm going to listen to you. You tell me how you're feeling about something. And even if I think that might not be the way I'd react to it, or that might not be the answer I think you need to get to, I need to understand that's how you are feeling as a person. And I've been getting an awful lot of people telling me how I should feel
Hmm.
without actually asking me how I felt. And when I did talk about it, being able to go, oh, I get that, or no, I don't get that, but I understand where you're coming from, because being told everything's going to be fine, it's that classic, stiff upper lip, everything will be fine, Rich, don't worry about it. I don't need to hear that 1,000 times. You're a great person. You're a wonderful human being. You're going to be brilliant in the future. Everything's going to be great for you. I didn't need to hear that. What I needed people to hear was, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm leaving something that I've been part of for 32 years. Allow me to feel a little bit down about it. And that was quite an important journey I've been on over the last couple of years, having left.
Yes, and you touch on a point for all leaders, male, female, but it's particularly a male thing, that we have this strong identity, often with our job. And if you're in such a powerful cultural organization like the Royal Air Force or the Army or the Navy, my stepson's in the police, whatever it might be, you associate so strongly with it that it's almost part of the fabric of your makeup, of your DNA, almost like stick a Brighton rock with the Royal Air Force through your body. So when you leave it, as you say, I wrote down leave and grieve the Royal Air Force. You left, and there was a grieving process. And I do think you brought out a really good point, which is about words create worlds. When I did with Bandler and McKenna, two characters in the world of neurolinguistic programming. Sounds all very good. But your words create worlds. And the Royal Air Force have a certain language which creates the world that you're in. And people who are in that understand it. But then when you meet someone from another walk of life, what are you talking about? And also, there's a danger as leaders that we tell each other we should, we must, we have to, and should do this, should do that, should do this, should do. Stop shoulding all over yourself. And do you want to? And you can, and I will. And I think often there's this obligation, and we're brought up with a sense of duty, serve to lead in Sandhurst and something similar, I'm sure, at the Royal Air Force Cranwell when I went and had a chance to speak there. The real sense of duty and doing things which are unpleasant, but they have to get done. And so it reminded me on the train when you and I were chatting that we were talking about success and happiness, and that we look over the fence and we see someone else they seem to be happy in. Do you want to just tell the story a bit about the
Yeah.
60?
So, in fact, it was on the higher command staff course, and we had a guest speaker, a motivational speaker, and he asked what was, in theory, a very simple question. He said, what is the amount of money you need to earn to be happy? Now you've got a bunch of colonels and group captains and all sitting around a room, and we're all sitting there going, and this is 2014. So there's the lever in terms of what the pay scale should be. We're all pitching in it. Well, it's got to be £1 million. I think probably £2 million. A couple of people felt a bit uncomfortable with that. Or maybe £500,000 I'd be happy with. And we'd all sort of pitched in at that sort of level, and we'd all got in our heads, that would allow us to do all sorts of amazing things. And he allowed us to have this sort of group chat. And at the end of it, he sort of said, okay, right, here's the answer. And we're all thinking, well, it's going to be one of us is going to be just about on the button. And I think the figure was around about £60,000. And we were all like, that's absolute rubbish. No, can't believe you. And he said, let me explain why £60,000 is the amount of money you need to earn to be happy. And he said, that would afford you to have your own home and have a mortgage. It would afford you to be able to pay your bills. It would afford you to be able to run a car and probably have a family holiday once a year, depending on the size of your family. And that would make you a content person. He said, if you then start to earn £100,000, then you start going, I've lived in that world. I can now afford something slightly bigger. And he described the analogy of looking over the fence. He said, because what will happen is you'll move from your semi-detached house, you move into a detached house area, but you'll look over the fence and somebody will have a slightly bigger car than you, or their house will have one more room than you. And you'll look over and go, they're doing this job and that's 250,000. So you won't be happy with your 100,000, even though you were with your 60,000, because you now want the slightly nicer car on the driveway. And he said, escalate that up now to you're now a millionaire and you can afford your boat and you can afford to take your boat somewhere, and you turn up in, Saint-Tropez, and your little boat gets tugged in and you're pulled in alongside an enormous cruise liner, and you're next to the big yachts there, and they're earning 10 or 20 million pounds, and so you're now not happy as a millionaire because you can't afford the Ferrari and the bigger boat. And he said that escalates. So you'll see very unhappy people are incredibly wealthy because they're always looking over the fence at what they could get next with the extra bit of money, and when they're not satisfied then with what they've got. And so we all kind of looked at each other and we all kind of nodded at each other, and we all went, no, I get that, but I still would probably have a good go at being happy with £250,000. But actually the point was, and I can see that, of you are always looking and trying to, there's nothing wrong with trying to better yourself, but there's doing that in a managed way, and not doing it through envy or greed and looking at the next person saying, I want what they've got. Well, okay, go and earn it, go and work for it, but don't be envious of them. Be comfortable with what you've got and be happy with what you've got.
Yeah, and as I think to the 400 guests I've had so far, and well over 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 CEOs and teams I've worked with, they are by nature, most of them, highly competitive and very comparative. And that's a double bind. Being competitive, fine, but when you're comparative, There's always this, well, someone's got more than me, and therefore I'm poor in comparison to them. And it drives people. That's great. But I just warn people to be careful about this goal obsession with I'll be happy when dot
Mm.
dot dot fill in the blank. Um, when I then I so when I get a six pack, then I'll go and train in the gym. No, no, no. You've got to train in the gym consistently for years, and then you might be leaner and healthier. But people want the instant gratification, and it doesn't come. Time and again, the constant message is it's hard grind, year after year, and eventually things might come, but sometimes they may not. So I'd love to go. I think you've got a lovely perspective of sort of wisdom and experience, and I just want you to perhaps share your thoughts, almost like a quick fire question, a bit like a mastermind. I had a CEO on the other day, lovely guy, and Vishal had been on Mastermind twice. And I think he's one of the very few people to answer all the questions correctly. He
Oh,
had this
wow.
this mind, and now he's in a tech company. Worked in Citibank. I think it's Vishal Dalal and CEO of Pismo. And anyway, so it's not going to be quite mastermind, but quick fire questions just to share your thoughts and experience. First one is darkest moment in your life, and what it taught you, Rich. That must have been personally or professionally a really dark moment, but from that darkness, there must be some good that you learned.
Wow, crikey. God knows where emotionally you're going to take me now. I think there's two things. One is very personal from my flying career. I lost a very good friend who crashed and died on a training mission, and he had been in my guard at my wedding in the summer of '99, and in the October the 14th. I know exactly the date. I also know the exact location because it was a village I grew up in. He crashed beside up in Northumberland, and he died. And I'd seen him in the morning. He'd been over at our house over the weekend to watch the football with me, and then on the Monday by 10 o'clock he crashed and died. And I really struggled with that because I hadn't really experienced death before from even from a family member or a friend, and that caused me a big pause in my life. I was recently married. I'm getting a bit of feedback, Jonathan. I don't know whether we're okay. And that was a real struggle for me, and I struggled with my flying for a period of time because there was a sort of risk appetite that subtly changed because I just lost a friend. So that was a difficult, dark moment for me, and I got out of that just by continuing to do the job I was doing, recognizing that I was good at what I did, and also coming home and enjoying my life with my wife. We'd only just got married at that point, and it was just about enjoying life and going, you know what, these things happen, and in that era, yeah, there were plenty of fast jet crashes, and sadly, many colleagues died, and you certainly went, that's part of the job, that is the risk we're taking, but I control that myself. So that was a dark place, and I got out of it by just continuing to work hard at what I was doing and trying to be as good as I possibly could. And the second one was my youngest son. So our children went to boarding school, and I'd not gone to boarding school, and we put them into school to give them a bit of stability because of the nature of being in the military and moving around a lot. And they'd gone to a prep school, and they'd gone at quite a young age. They were sort of 9 and 10. And I'd gone to Afghanistan in 2012, and I'd gone there to work in Kabul in the headquarters, right in the centre of town. And I would say, although risky travelling in and out, it was a risky place to be, full stop. But I didn't feel necessarily that I was anywhere near the level of risk that some of those young soldiers were involved in Afghanistan. So I felt quite safe. But my youngest son was at an age, he was 10, 11, and he was starting to watch the news, and it was the news round, and sadly there was the stories of soldiers dying or coming back, and you saw them all coming through the town, and the people would be standing there watching the coffins go through. He'd watched that and correlated that and applied that to where I was, and had then had a almost a PTSD from that experience, and he had night traumas, nights he couldn't sleep, and that lasted with him for about another 5 or 6 years. And we got him some counselling, and it was only through the counselling that this sort of story was able to come out, that actually it was that time in Afghanistan that had caused him so much trauma as a young child that we didn't pick up at all. And I still feel enormous amount of guilt for that. He's stronger now for all of his experiences, but the impact that I had on my young son's life through what I did, through what I thought was quite safe, I hadn't really thought through.
I really sorry for what you went through, both with losing your friend from your wedding, and also what your son went through. And I, in a slightly different way, relate to that because from a family of pilots, my uncle was killed flying, my father was killed flying, my grandfather was killed flying, and it all happened over a period of time when my eldest brother Graham was the oldest one at the time. Probably could take more in. He was about the same age as your son, and my mother came home and explained, came to boarding school, and explained that father had been killed, and he asked her if she wouldn't come and see him at the school during the holidays, because every time she came, she just told him someone had died.
Yeah.
And I think, it's only years later you realize the impact when you talk to people and you sort of think this is normal. And they go, no, no, no. You had three members of your family died catastrophically, suddenly, violently, and that wasn't expected. And that's not normal. It's like a
No.
family trauma that is carried in the family. And your son carried that. And I really, really feel for him. So I'm glad you're able to get him some help because um, you don't realize many people have pretty easy lives, and I'm lucky enough to coach some CEOs and some leaders, and they go, oh, I've had a tough day. No, let me tell you about a tough day. Not my own story, but just what some of the other people I've been with. There's Toby Guttridge. Toby was kicking down a door of a terrorist house to capture a guy, and he got shot through the neck and quadriplegic. His life has changed from that moment, and he was in his 20s, about 25 years old. That's a bad day.
Yeah.
What you're having is just hard work. It's not a bad day. And I think putting things in perspective really helps us, not to belittle what people are going through, but just it's very easy to take the victim or to suffer from PTSD or from some trauma, which you're not quite sure where it comes from. But not talking about it. I had Jason Fox on from SAS Who Dares Wins, the TV personality, a really lovely, humble guy, but also a real character. And we were each talking about moments that we'd had. And he goes, the best thing is to talk about it. But people, certainly the armed forces, they stiff up a lip, think you don't talk about it. Thank you. I didn't expect us to go quite there. You said you weren't sure emotionally where you were going to take. I was going to take you. I think it's where you took me. So thank you for that, Rich. Let's go back thinking about younger children to when you were 16 to 18 years old. You get in the DeLorean. Rich Davies gets out, Back to the Future, and he meets his younger self. What would you say to the young 16, 18-year-old Rich Davies about what matters and what doesn't matter?
Wow. I almost try and put myself in my father's shoes of what he should have said to me and whether I would have listened. And I think the latter bit is the important bit for me. Is if I'd gone back to tell my 16-year-old self what I knew now, I absolutely would not have listened.
Yeah.
And I say that because that's the sort of person that I was. I knew what I wanted to do, and nobody was going to stop me from joining the Air Force and being a pilot. Even though I hadn't gone to Biggin Hill at this point at 16, I actually went. I was 17 when I went down for selection, so I didn't even know whether I was going to get in. And I sort of, if I put myself in my father's shoes, I have no idea how he managed to get through that period, because he probably knew that there's a chance I wasn't going to make it. It's a bit like your child wants to be a Premier League football player. Well, the reality is not everybody's going to make it. In fact, probably the reality is none of the children out there are going to make it unless one or two. Um,
Mm.
so I would probably go back and tell my 16-year-old self, who's not going to listen, to just go for it. Believe in what you want to believe in and go for what you are passionate about. And I try and do that. Mike, I've got two sons who are 23 and 21, and we've had this conversation. They're quite envious of both my wife and I. My wife went to be a nurse at 17, and I joined the Air Force at 18. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And their question to me is, what would you have done if you hadn't been a pilot? Absolutely no idea, Jonathan, what I would have done.
Yeah.
Absolutely no idea. And because they don't know what they want to do, I sit there going, crikey, how do I advise you if you're not quite sure? And I think that's, for going back now, if I met myself, this person who was pretty cocky, knew what he wanted to do, I'd just say, go for it. Embrace it and go for it.
It's so true. And, I was 18 and wanted to become an army officer. People said, why don't you want to join the Navy like your father? He was a fast jet pilot. He was on board aircraft carriers. I said, I didn't like the sea so much. It didn't really excite me. But Captain Commando, I remember reading magazines about that at the age of 14. And, I was always with my action. That was what I was going to do. But it's a sideline I occasionally do for some of my CEO clients. And if your sons do want to spend a couple of sessions with me, I sometimes take them through a couple of psychometrics. When they're at that stage that they're sort of 22 to 26, they just don't quite know what to do. One or two of the psychometrics are quite helpful. And just having someone who's not your parent
Yeah.
have a
And
conversation
that's
with.
critical. Yeah.
So if I can help, let's have a chat. I've done that for a few of the CEO's sons, doing that with one now. Let's go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass very briefly before we end with your top tip. Moral quotient. Uh, if you had someone who's let their values slip, what's been your experience, in how they get themselves back on track when they've let their values slip, their moral quotient?
So I mean, I've had a few experiences of that. I probably would say that I've probably been there as well at times, and I think
I have. I
that
have.
that latter point is hugely important. That I'm able to recognise in the leadership roles that I held that I've made mistakes, and I have taken the wrong path on occasions, and therefore therefore is it's right that others might make that same mistake. So, the fact that I'm sitting in a position of leadership and responsibility doesn't necessarily mean that I've had the perfect path. And remembering that when you are working with people, I think is hugely important. And I have to say, my wife was the number one person who would always say to me, "Don't forget what you did.
Mm.
Remember how you were when you are looking at somebody doing probably something you would have done at their age." The second point for me is don't be too quick to judge and don't be too quick to come to assumptions as to why somebody's done what they've done. Because invariably, and I know you've interviewed David Marquet, and he's somebody that has absolutely inspired me through his book. I've never met him, and I would love to meet him. But I'm sure he quoted it, but I've certainly used it in my leadership. Is I genuinely strongly believe people don't come to work to do a bad job. That they don't set out to do things wrong. Now, I'm sure there are some bad people out there, but in the working environment that I've been in, people make mistakes, and you might see that as them taking the wrong path or taking the wrong route in life for whatever it might be. But I've always been the first thing for me has always been to understand why they've taken that, and then provide advice after that. Once you understand the backstory that sits with it, because I genuinely don't think maybe my cup is always half full about people. I'm always very positive about them, and I always believe that they've taken a particular decision for some other reason. I give
Yeah,
them the benefit of the doubt.
it's very true. And I always liken it to intentions versus behavior. We judge ourselves by our intentions, never our behavior, but we judge others by their behaviors and never by their intentions because we don't ask them what their intentions were. We just see their action, their behavior, and make a judgment. A bit like meeting the guests at the hotel and making a decision on what jobs they did. Purpose quotient is the next one, meaning and purpose in your life. And a couple of my clients that I'm coaching at the moment have come to me specifically because they're wanting to find in their mid 50s the next phase of their life, what gives their life meaning and purpose. We become more pro social in our 50s anyway. But when people have lost that sense of meaning and purpose, or even you have, what did you find brought you back on track? So, for example, you've had to change from the Royal Air Force to now being an advisor and a consultant. How did you sort of find your new meaning and purpose? What was the essence of it?
So for me, it's always been family, and that's really always been at the center of um, who I am, and has shaped what I've become. So if I've ever been in doubt about anything that I've been doing, I turn to Kate and the boys, and they are the center of everything that I do, and they're the reason I do what I do. Um, so that's point number one. So for me, it's centered around family. Um, and the second bit really is a sense of purpose about what it is I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I had that in spades, and in big bucketfuls in the Air Force. When I was young, I'd wake up in the morning and it was all about being better at flying, and I knew exactly what I was trying to achieve. Didn't necessarily always achieve it, but I knew the destination I was trying to get to in my flying career. Um, and I had that sense through the command and leadership roles that I had, and it was about looking after the people, and they were always the center of my attention and my focus when I was in command. It wasn't necessarily about the output of flying the aircraft. It was about the people around it, and I knew that the output would come if I had the right, if I motivated the people and I gave them that sense to be able to operate in that space. So that was kind of the where I'd get my sense of purpose. And again, my advice to my children right now is find a job where you can wake up in the morning knowing that you're looking forward to doing that, and you feel that there is value to it, because you're going to be doing that for most of your working life, and also most of your working day and living day. So you're going to be working most of your life. So find something that motivates you and makes you get up in the morning going, right, I'm looking forward to doing this. Don't just do it because it pays the bills. Now that's very easy for me to say because I've been very fortunate in everything I've done, and I know there are plenty of people out there who might listen to this and go, yeah, but I just need to find a job that pays the bills. But if you can find something that motivates you, then by God, it's more rewarding and you'll be more successful.
No, very very good advice. Can't agree more. And on the third one, health quotient, health, well-being, mental health, physical health. How do you keep yourself healthy? And I do, in meeting you, you look, in good shape and healthy and fit. How do you keep yourself healthy? And what tips would you pass on to others?
Wow. So, well, thank you. Firstly, it must be the camera angle. I've always been active. I mean, I like cycling. I play golf. I go to the gym, um, and I found through running, in particular, and also going out the road bike, I can switch my mind off and think about big problems that might be going on there. I can find the answer whilst I'm out running or I'm out on the bike, and it makes me feel a little bit more positive when I come back. So I think exercise is hugely important. Um, I also find within that trying to not go away. If I want to go away I'm going away with a bunch of friends of mine. We go and play golf for 7 days in Turkey, and it's a great competition, a bit of fun. But I don't go with my work phone. I don't take work with me. I've never done that on any of my holidays, and I find if you can put everything away and find that space for yourself, both physically and mentally, that doesn't involve work. Often I will be out there running and I'll think through a problem set, and it'll actually be a lot clearer when I'm away from the desk. But I always say, leave your work behind when you've got your time off, and make that time off as valuable as you possibly can about you, your family, and yourself. And so yes, active. I try and stay as active as I possibly can. It becomes a little bit harder through the winter time because it tends to be more indoors than it can be outdoors. We've got our third retriever has joined the family. He's 6 months old now, so that forces you to get out in the morning, no matter what the weather, and forces you to go out in the evening as well. So yeah, get out and be active, but also, as I say, try and switch off from the day job if you can.
Yeah, very wise. Emotional intelligence, emotional and social intelligence. You have struck me as someone who's very good at listening to other people. It's work in progress for me. But how do you encourage people to listen well to others?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. I wow, I do, and it's in my nature to do it. And I think if you ask people, that's probably one of the things that I've always been very good at is listening to people. I'll talk about them rather than myself if I'm meeting someone. And I would always encourage people to do that. It's interesting. You can end of an evening or an end of an event, and they haven't asked you a single question about yourself. I don't walk away feeling upset by that, but I do find it quite fascinating that people don't do that. So ask about, have an interest in people. It's not difficult. Ask them what they do, what their hobbies are, what they've done over the weekend. Doesn't matter what level they are within your working structure. Show an interest in them. You'll be surprised what you get back from that interaction. And I've always enjoyed that side of it. So yeah, I think that will probably be the bit of advice I give.
That's fine. And I think before we go to the top tip, the final one I'd ask is executive teams or leadership teams. How have or how would you advise people from all your years' experience of seeing it done well and done badly to turn around toxic teams or a team with somebody who's toxic in it? What would you recommend?
So I strongly believe in the old Myers-Briggs profiling, because I think that it's often the toxic leader sits in one of those core areas and tends to be in the sort of red, I think it is, which is I'm important and I need to deliver. And I think you need to. The way I've dealt with toxic leaders and people who are toxic in my organization is to work out what makes them tick and try and channel them in that direction and use it to deflect away from probably the others that are around them who might not necessarily operate in that way. Because often I think the toxic leader is probably slightly misunderstood or not heard, and it's about channeling them in the right direction. I'm not one for removing them from a team. I think you just need to be able to work out what's making them tick. Why are they being the way they are? Some people find it really difficult to communicate, and that comes across as being quite toxic because they struggle in that environment. And I've worked for plenty who have been, I would say, toxic in that way. But also, if you can, is to provide support to the people who are working for them and around them as well, and being aware that they may be having a challenging working environment and try and support them as best you possibly can. So that would be my advice on toxic leadership.
Yeah, thank you. So, would you now kindly introduce, say who you are, what you're doing now, what you've done, some of the jobs you've done in the past, a little a bit of a thumbnail sketch, and then give us a practical leadership tip, something we can all apply in our different jobs in the 126 countries around the world that are listening to you, Rich.
Wow. Okay, so I'm Rich Davis, a retired Air Force officer. After 32 years, I now work as a military advisor in the air and space domain for MBDA as a consultant. My advice on leadership, a couple of, if I may. Firstly, get to know your people, get to know a little bit about them outside of their working environment. Having that personal interaction with somebody and having that interaction with your team is a huge benefit. I remember it as a young junior officer when the boss asks you what you've been up to at the weekend and isn't just about the job you're doing and how that lifts you. So that's point one: is get to know your people and get to know them a little bit more personally than just what they provide to you as an output in the working environment. The second tip is to try as much as you possibly can to start everything in a positive way. It's very easy to be negative. Um, the T-bar moment, which you used to have where everybody would talk about the negative things in their life, where you'd come home and you'd have a very negative conversation about the miserable day you've had. Always try and start the day and end the day positives first, and then if you need to go to the negatives, and you'll find actually it forces you into a relatively positive frame of mind at the beginning of the day. Say thank you to people for the work that they are doing and spend more time recognizing that in everything that you do, because again, being thanked by your chain of command, by your boss, is a hugely powerful thing to receive. and actually is a hugely powerful thing to do. So spend that time to thank people for the work that they're doing, no matter how minor it is, and no matter how small it is, or potentially insignificant within your organisation. If you say thank you to somebody, even if it's somebody who comes in every day to clean the offices out, just say thank you to them, have a conversation with them. I think that's hugely important thing to do. So I guess it's all about communication and listening.
That's excellent. Well, Rich Davies, thank you very much indeed. Rich Davies CBE, and what an award that is, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and just being a very real, authentic leader, which is what we all look to aspire to be like. And great having you on the podcast.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.